driving here yesterday, and it was right around here. Turned this radio station on, and the guy was talking about preaching on sin. And you don't hear people preach on sin. I'm gonna preach on sin a good bit, but I want to bring it into the truth of it. Truth of sin, how God dealt with it. And one of the things he said that kind of had me laughing there for a second was how people especially do not want to get involved in the first 3 chapters of Romans. And I guess that was all the things he says there and how we've interpreted the touchiness of those things, and we don't want to get involved in the first part of Romans. Man, that's a controversial part of the letter. But see, it's only controversial when you do not realize the context of sin. All of the things he's bringing out in the first part, and we know what's been done with that, the divisions that have come because of it. It's because we look at individuals to determine sin. We look at one another and the activities of one another to determine sin and the level of sin. Now, this is a real bad sin, this isn't so bad. And the fact is, Paul does none of that as far as seeing the whole thing defined with individuals in view. He is seeing the whole thing, as you'll see when you read Romans 5, he basically begins to summarize what he said previous and open a door for what he's going to say in the 5th chapter, when he begins to talk about the comparison of 2 men. There are 2 men that always govern reality. As far as God's perspective, God's view, God's relationship with men. 2 men have governed that from the beginning. Matter of fact, before the very beginning, only one did. And that's what we've come to in Christ. The one who was the predetermination of God before the foundation of the world. There was one man that always governed his direction, his dealings, his doings, his sayings. Then in creation we have another man in view. We have another man that is created that comes. And we know what happened with that man. That man becomes a governmental identifying figure for all mankind. And we've read it. I don't want to get into this and then not get too far away from it, but let's just read it a little bit. Because we're going to see this in the context, and I'm trying to find a place to really start with you because of all the stuff. As he said, I've been on this a couple of years now, so I've got a lot of things that we could go to, but I don't have many sessions to do it. And Sunday, I really want this to kind of all culminate on Sunday when I begin to look at something that's fresh in my heart. If you have the ability, and this is not to plug it, but your pastor has one too here, the podcast that you guys have. But I have a podcast also, Podbean. It's called the Satisfied God Podcast. And if you have the ability to get to that, I think these studies on Romans start somewhere around, I don't know, maybe episode 33 or something like that. And now we're in episode 60. And so we've been dealing with Romans on that podcast. And so if you can, that would be where you can kind of get it from the very beginning. So I'm going to jump around, get a few things, and then something that's fresh on my heart that talks about what I think has been such a great misunderstanding in the church. And even those of us in the church who say that we are knowing the Lord and say that we are seeing Christ. To me, there's a real confusion for some. And it has to do with the thing of death. Dead in, dead to. Dead in sin, dead to sin. That is a confusion that is dominant in the church. Because again, we have never seen it, and a few months, I don't know, 2 years ago, I would never have been able to say what I'm going to say. Because I would never have been able to know it in the context that I'm knowing it in. And you see it in the purity of it in these chapters of Romans. But to understand the soul and its participation in both sides of this, in the Adamic side and in Christ. And you see the soul's participation in this, things begin to clarify like I've never seen. Things begin to make sense. So that when you can say, I have to die, I have to die, then you see there's a confusion with that, because when you say that, and I'm getting way ahead, but when you say things like that without contextualizing it, without realizing what is really the basis of that statement, and a lot of times when we say that statement, it's just absolutely false. Because how can that which is dead die any longer? The problem is we don't understand the immensity and the completeness of the death, because we don't understand the absoluteness and the fullness of the life that is present. Because the presence of the one is the elimination of the other. The presence of the one is the ceasing of the other, or the absence of the other. When life is present, death cannot be. But when we say we have to die, we will do that in a context of the Adamic, because that's where we look, that's where we observe things. And so our entire judgment is based upon the false assumptions that are rendered by the natural eye. I look at you and say, oh, man, you need to die. Or I look at myself and my actions, my thoughts, whatever. Oh, I have to die. But we're going to look at it as we go in this weekend. Sin was of such a nature, and we'll talk about it tonight, but let me just make this statement because I think it's important. Sin was of such a nature and so real and so prevalent and superseding that you really could not know the full nature of sin or any true aspect of sin looking at any body, anything you saw, any action you perceived with your natural eye, never truly gave you the evidence of sin. Ever. And see, you can say that with righteousness too. That righteousness is of such a nature, and it's so real and so perfect that you cannot know it with natural eyes. You cannot understand it with a natural mind. And yet we do. We try to. We try to understand it with a natural mind. Therefore, we are assessing each other, ourselves. We're comparing one another amongst ourselves. And Paul says that's not wise. And why does he say that? Because that's not in accordance with wisdom, the wisdom of God. Because the wisdom of God is that he has brought us into Christ and has made Christ to be unto us all spiritual things. Righteousness, justification, sanctification. I remember being raised in a church, sanctification was a big deal. It was the second definite work. You had to be saved, then you had to be sanctified. And there was everybody in that church and their mother was assessing you to see if you were sanctified enough to get the next level, which was the Spirit. Now, some of you don't even understand that, but that's what I was raised in. But that's what men can do with these things. We make levels, we make steps, we make categories. And you cannot make steps and levels out of one man. You couldn't do it in sin, and you sure can't do it in righteousness. I want us to see that. All of our spiritualizing of flesh has caused us to render levels and This thing's the achievement. I mean, even with new birth, we've done the same thing with that. And I've been in this study understanding the significance of new birth as I never have before. So much so that I think we've done a great disservice to the reality of new birth. Because to us, many, new birth has been just a stepping stone to get to the good, to get to the more, to get to the better. When the new birth is when all of that comes into your soul. Do you know anything about it? No, not at all. You hear a lesson preached on it? Oh, absolutely. You hear it. Do you comprehend it? No, not even the guy that's preaching it does fully. Guess what? In the midst of that ignorance, whatever level of ignorance there is a salvation that anchors your soul regardless. There is a life that is anchoring you in a relationship with God that you cannot have otherwise, even when you're ignorant. And some would say, that's me rejoicing in ignorance. But that's me rejoicing in the sufficiency of grace. The sufficiency of grace is that being ignorant of it or not does not nullify it. Ignorance does not nullify reality. That's why it's called reality. If ignorance nullifies it or diminishes it to any degree, it's not real. Real means it is real regardless. And it is that realness, that reality, that perfect life that Christ himself is that comes to dwell in your soul the moment you are born of his Spirit. In all fullness. You don't get half, and then the next part, and then the next part. Again, levels. What do I have to do to qualify for the next step or the next level? Or what did I do to disqualify for? Disqualify myself for that next step, that next level. The fact is, however, as a soul, you had to first qualify to disqualify, and you didn't. You neither qualify yourself or disqualify yourself because your soul is known of God and related to of God in the confines of a man, whether it's in sin or in life. In Adam, all died. In Christ, all live. It's as simple as that. And we want to complicate it. Because complicating it, bringing a fog of confusion on it, gives me the ability to then teach you how to get out of the confusion. See, I confuse you so I can teach you how to get out of it. That's what religion has done. That's what Christianity has done, sadly. The truth of the gospel is the singleness or the simplicity of Christ. One man. Determining your soul's condition just because he's present. And from that basis, the Spirit of God that's in you calling your soul to a greater comprehension of the one who is present. And saying, come and see this man. Come and see the life that I have given you by grace, that I have bestowed, all the spiritual blessings that you in ignorance will try to obtain by works and efforts and deeds and zealous actions. Come and see that I've already fully furnished your soul with all of those things in this man, in Christ. In Christ we have. If you read Ephesians, and I would recommend you do that, the first chapter of Ephesians, the first chapter of Colossians, you see the same thing, and it's the order that Paul always has in his letters. It's easier in those two to really pick out because it's so evident. But it's his order. Reality is present. Now I pray you see reality. Isn't that simple? He doesn't qualify it. He doesn't make conditions. We'll read about it, but let's start here just a second. Romans chapter 5. Because I want to show you where these two men come into play, because this is going to take, for the whole weekend, this is going to be where we are. Not in these verses, but in this thought. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. Now, do you see that? That's a clear-cut statement that says one thing. One man determines the state of all. If one man sinned, all are sinners. Why? Because these all who are sinners are born of the seed of that one man. And because his seed is in them, that seed determines their soul that has that seed within it, their soul's condition, their soul's state of being is determined by the thing to which that soul is joined. You hear what I'm saying? That the condition of the soul is exclusively determined by the thing to which that soul is joined. We're going to see it throughout this weekend, especially Sunday. I want to really focus on that. But this governs the whole thing. You have to realize that, or else you're going to assess individuals to understand sin and righteousness. And neither can be defined with individuals in view. Sin is defined in a man. Righteousness is defined in a man. Death is defined in a man. Life is defined in a man. And you're either in one or the other. And you say, well, that's very simple. It's simple, but it's lost in the church. It's lost. Because we can say these things and say, yes, I agree with that, and then next thing you know, we're preaching ourselves. And we're putting ourselves into an equation where there's only two men, we're bringing ourselves into that equation. I mean, it has to be. With the way we're preaching it, that's what's happening. Because if you say, one died for all are dead, so that those who would live would now live by him, not unto themselves, but unto him that not only died, but rose again. Right? Bringing again the whole transition from one to the other. One died, putting that man to death, all died. All who are in that man of death and sin, dead in sin. That's their state. So that, and this is going to become, I'm just kind of throwing some stuff out there. So that he can now offer himself as the risen Son. And as the risen one, what is he now? The resurrection and the life of all who will live. That's why 1 Corinthians 15, and we may get into that more, will tell us that if Christ is not risen, then our preaching's in vain, and we are yet where? In our sin. There has been no transition from death, which was our state in Adam, to life, which is the state of Christ. No transition if he's not risen. The rising of Christ, the raising up by the glory of the Father, the quickening of this man by the Spirit, is God bringing forth an entire new reality that those who are dead here, he can offer himself as the newness of life, the resurrection in life, to those who are dead and say, come. Those who hear my voice, they shall live. Right? Those who hear the voice of the Son of Man and are obedient unto that voice, come unto me, live. That's the transition. So now those who have come to him are no longer dead here. They're not dead in sin. What have they now, by virtue of being found in life himself, what are they now? Dead to sin. The one who is dead to sin and alive unto God. That's why Romans 6 beautifully says that he that died, dieth no more. And that in that he died unto sin once, he will never have, death will never have dominion over him again. He's talking not just about physical death, but the whole realm of death that Adam is. The thing that he took upon himself to put away so that those bound to this man could be liberated and delivered from death and brought into life. This is the whole reality I could not have said 2 years ago. Because when I said I'm dead, I thought I was dead. I say I live, I'm the one living. No, it's the one to whom your soul is joined. This is a whole new context for me. This is a whole new thing. You'll see it. We'll read it as we go in these lessons. Paul will bring it into 2 or 3 different pictures. Chapter 6, it's about kingdom, about being in bondage to a tyrant or slave owner. Chapter 6 of Romans says this, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed. Do we think he didn't do that? I mean, we read these things, and yet in our teaching and in our concepts, we're acting as if these things aren't even written. These just must, I don't know what Paul was saying here. There's no way it's destroyed. The body of sin is destroyed. Has that happened or not? This says it has. Not only that, Colossians says it has. He says that having come into Christ, this is Colossians chapter 2, you write it down, we'll read it probably during this weekend, that you have been circumcised with a circumcision, not made with hands. This is by virtue of just being born of this man, born of Christ, born of the Spirit, indwelt by his seed. By virtue of that, nothing else, nothing extra, you have been baptized into his death, and therefore circumcised, that's the cutting off, with a circumcision not done by man's hand, meaning you've come to the culmination of every circumcision that's ever been presented in the testimony. Because that was all the testimony of a circumcision that man could not do, but only God could do. Man's hands had nothing to do with the circumcision we have experienced in Christ. Now, what is that circumcision? He further explains it in the putting off of an entire body of sin. Now, has that happened or not? Or do we qualify statements that he did not? He didn't qualify that. He says if you're in Christ, this is what's happened. That's why he can say above that in Colossians 2, in this man you are complete. And yet, assessing self, again, bringing man as the reference point for any of these things, you will lose sight of that. Because such completeness will never be found in you. Not looking at you or me, our works, lack thereof, our thoughts, lack thereof, none of it. And you'll see this in Romans with this man under the law, and you see it in Christians today who still try to find it. What Paul was trying to find as one not born again under the law, Christians today who are born again are trying to find the same thing. And that's the reason Paul puts that biography in Romans 7, not to show them, hey, this is what you're going to have to go through, guys. This is just it. This is the Christian experience. It's a tough one. My Bible, in Romans 7, after verse 6, the Christian struggle is the heading. over those verses. And there's nothing Christian or there's no Christian in this, Romans 7. Paul's biographical little part in Romans 7 is not about a Christian struggling. It's about a man of the law trying to be what only Christ is, trying to fulfill a law that never had men being perfect as its goal, but a perfect man as its end. You see what I'm saying? And yet we're still in Christianity trying to be what Christ alone is. When the fact is that if you're born of Christ, Christ has already made unto you all that he is. There is no struggle to get it. You already have all things. All things are now yours. He has given us all things to enjoy. The question is never, do we have all things because we have him? The question is, are we enjoying the all things? I'll tell you right now, most Christians are not. Because he's not the beauty. They are. He's not the object that identifies their soul's condition. They are. And if you were the object that ever defined or determined anything, you wouldn't have got in, let alone stayed. That's why he had to be the door. That's why he has to be the priest. That's why he had to be the offering. Nothing we have done. It is the gift of God. I know most people have just preached grace into nothingness today. Made just a joke out of grace. God's got these open arms. He just loves everybody. No, he loves his son. And the grace of God is that he has shed abroad in our hearts that love. Therefore, my soul has the love of God in it. Therefore, Paul can say, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, Christ liveth in me. And again, that's not something you work your way into. That's something that is the moment you're born again, that's reality. I am crucified with Christ. We're going to talk about that. Crucified with Christ doesn't mean he stabbed me to death and killed me because he hates me. Soul is not hated of God. God did not bring wrath upon the soul. The soul was never the object of wrath. The thing that held the soul. That's where we've got to go. That's where we have to see. Or either I'm still in the equation somewhere as a determining factor, not just a recipient, not just a participant, but as a determinant. That's where we get really messed up. My soul is either born of the seed of one or born of the seed of the other, but my soul doesn't determine either. My soul is a receiver of the one or the other. And the benefits and the riches or the death or the life or the, knowing that Christ being raised from the dead dieth no more, death hath no more dominion over him. In that he died unto sin once, but in that he liveth unto God. See, I died unto sin once. This was a once and for all thing. And yet, we preach it as if there is some need for us to reenact on a daily basis what he has once and for all accomplished. Many times I've said it's almost like, they're doing reenactments in the South, in this part of the country, reenactments of the Civil War. Well, guess what? It never changes the result. That war's done, it's over, the result is the result. Your reenactment can't change anything, and neither can the reenactments of this. So we're out there trying to get people to die to this and get people to kill themselves, crucify yourself, die daily, and we give them steps on how to do it. Guess what? It doesn't change anything. What determines everything is the one that's in you. And that one is eternally dead to sin and alive unto God. Now there's a reckoning that has to happen in your heart. Not a reenactment, but a recognition of the state of the one that is there. And that is that the one who is my life, the one who lives in me, and made unto me all spiritual blessings, is dead unto sin and alive unto God. And the soul that he inhabits has that same condition as its own. Needing nothing more but understanding. That's it. Just comprehending what is there. Just knowing as we are known. Knowing does not make him know you. Knowing as we are known. And that's how it's worded. We think knowledge brings about something more. Knowledge just shows us what God has already brought about. What's already been present. Since the day you were born of the Spirit of a perfect man, the perfect life and perfect righteousness that is the intrinsic to that perfect life is present, has been from that moment. And I don't say, so just go do your thing. It's all good. No, I say now. Doesn't that, shouldn't that, and to me it does, makes your heart, it gives your heart a greater desire to know the one who is present. Now you can stop trying to be the one who's present. Now you can stop trying to acquire these things and just behold the one who has acquired you. The change has never been to men. We're looking for change. Oh, it's got to change. There's a change coming. Well, we always look here to see the change. The change has come from one man to another. Now we must know and see the change, meaning we must see the man. Who is that change? Who has brought about the transition and the translation from one to the other. Now, why do you think, and again, this is what started all this, that he uses these pictures of enslavement to a slave master here in chapter 6? As long as you're enslaved to sin, and listen to how clear-cut this is. While you were slaves to sin, you were what? Free from righteousness. Wait a minute, wasn't there a little bit of it? No, not at all. No. Wait a minute, I did a lot of good stuff when I was a sinner. No, not at all. That's why Romans 3 can plainly say there is none that seek God. Man, we can balk at that, can't we? I mean, if we're looking at ourselves and they say there's none righteous, none holy, none good, none that seeks after God, none. And we say, well, I know my grandma did. None. You see how important to the picture we really are? That if that's your state, you need someone to superimpose himself in this situation. To interrupt this. To bring about a deliverance from this state that you can't get yourself from. There's only one thing that does that. Death. Whose? His. His. See, this is what we have to talk about, because when we get to death, we just get confused. Wait a minute, don't I have to? You are found in the one who is dead to sin. Wait a minute. See, this is the, I think I threw this example out to you, and maybe some of you ain't got it over yet if you remember it. Here's a baby in a manger, or not a manger, but a baby in a crib. Here's a drunk on the street. And we want to make those two separate issues. In Adam, they're not. They're not. They're just as dead, just as much sin, Now see, we really have trouble with that because individuals define things for us, but not for God. That's why you must. Remember, Jesus says this to Nicodemus. You must. He doesn't say you could be if you want to. You must be born again. You must be born of another seed, because this seed is death. This seed is corruption. This seed is empty. This seed has no good fruit in it and never will. And so the levels that we try to build in Adam of this is the baby innocent, this is pretty good, this is a church goer, this is, dead. Because you can still go to church and be an Adam. About being born again. But then you have those who are born again that still relate as if they're in Adam. So their whole life, their whole religious exercise is about getting out from a place they're not even found anymore. To stop doing things. And that's mostly what really keeps us praying at night. God, forgive me for that. I shouldn't have done that. And I don't say don't ask God for forgiveness or any of that. I'm just saying, as long as that is the occupation, you'll never say, just show me the righteousness that you have given. You'll say, stop me from doing this. You won't say, show me the righteous one. Because seeing light will immediately eliminate dark. Seeing reality will eliminate the thing that's not. You will live in accordance to the thing that is truly, you are truly knowing. The thing, and I'm telling you, a reality governs you even when you don't understand it. Adam governed you from the moment you were born. You didn't know that. You had no idea. You may die not knowing that. But there was a government governing your soul and determining everything with regard to it. You had no idea. Same thing in Christ. And I asked this question on Mondays, and when was David actually king of Israel? We make a lot of their coming to him, coronating him, just the men. And then we make a big deal of him being coronated by the whole of the land, whole of Israel. When was he actually king? When Samuel came to the house of his father.
Amen.
Nobody knew it. His brother didn't even believe it. Because they had already been refused. They were probably out sulking, mad. God told Samuel, go to the house of Jesse and anoint my, you hear that? My king. That's what mattered. From that moment, he was king of Israel. No matter what else happened, he was king. No matter what. Their recognition only brought them into an enjoyment of that. But their recognition didn't make it so. God's did. And that's what I'm saying about new birth. The moment you are born of the seed of a perfect man, the recognition of God is upon the perfect man. There's a word that we use a lot in the church, and it's conformed, right? To be conformed. We love to be conformed to the image of the Son. Be conformed. And so immediately in the church world, we have made that conformity. So conformity means to change your actions, your thoughts, your habits, your attitudes, everything. Conform to this. And it's almost like conform to our form. Okay. Then what? Because I know a lot of people conform to a form, but they're not conformed in their heart. Their heart doesn't understand it. Their heart doesn't comprehend, because the point is, if they're born of God, they've already been conformed. They've been transformed and conformed. Someone told me one time, we were talking about this, and he didn't agree very much. And he said, yeah, but new birth does not transform your soul. I said, out of one thing into another. Right? It did do that. That's what determines reality. If you want to say transformation has to do with understanding, and where you see one greater form and the other form is kind of done away because you see the greater form, you're brought from one form to another, that's true. In understanding, yes, you have to see it, but you're already translated from one thing to the other. You're already brought to the reality. In a literal word study, I've been looking at this a lot. There's a word study that was dealing with conform. And I appreciate what he said because it was clarified something. And it really helps in view of what we're talking about. He says that most people look at it as a change in the very essence of our being. Like to be conformed means I'm sweet to everybody, or, I've seen some people say I glow in the dark. I mean, I've heard things like that. It gets to that level of ignorance. I'll never die. All of those things are what people think conformity to the image of the Son will bring about. But he says, why can we not understand it's not a change of the essence of our being, but it's the change of the form by which one is identified. It's the form that now identifies you. You are conformed to the image of the Son. That means you're brought into another who now identifies your soul's condition to the Father. Conformed. That's a beautiful way to see it. Now there's another reality that defines and identifies my soul before God. Because, here's the thing, if you look at the cross as God eliminating or ending his relationship with you, you're seeing a wrong idea of the cross. He did not end his relationship with Rabon at the cross because he never had one. Do we understand that? If we're going to keep it in the context of two men, we have to do it. He never had a relationship with Rabon to end. He had a relationship with a man who held Rabon in bondage to sin and death. That's the relationship he ended at the cross and gave a final blow to it so that Rabon can now find relation to another. Now, again, there's the picture. Enslavement to a slave, that's one picture. Right the next chapter, I can't tell you why, have to talk to Paul about it. He has the same thought in mind, but doesn't use a slave owner and a slave. He uses a husband and a wife. I don't know what kind of equating he was trying to do there, but he uses in chapter 7 of Romans a husband and a wife. We're going to talk about that a lot Sunday with this marriage. What had to happen for that woman who was bound to that man? The law of her husband governed her. She could not break from it, because if she broke from it before he died, she would be an adulteress if he was joined to another. But if he died, that's the only hope of escape. They didn't hold hands and slit each other's throat. The husband died. That's the picture. This will make more sense Sunday as we look at it. The husband died. The thing that held her in bondage. The thing that governed her as a law. The thing that kept her in a state where the only fruit that could ever be born was the fruit unto death. He says all that in that part of Romans 7. The man had to go. The husband had to die. God didn't kill her in this picture. The husband died. So that she, now free from the law of that husband, Because she is dead to the law of that husband. Why? Because she died too? No, because he died. Egypt went through the door, right? They went through the door with blood on it. They were found in the death of the Lamb. Were they killed by the wrath of God that came upon Egypt? No. They were dead to it. They came forth as those who were dead to the bondage of Egypt. They were freed, liberated by death from death. You see what I'm saying? Death is the thing that held them had to die. And even in that picture, you see the distinction between the firstborn of Egypt, the firstborn of God. One had to go. Didn't kill both of them. Killed one. Now the one that raises up is dead to it. Not dead in it. Dead to it. That's why they had to eat the blood of the lamb. That's why they had to eat the lamb. All of it. That's why they had to do that. That's why they had to go into the house with the blood on the door. They went there in obedience to the death of the lamb. They became dead to the death that held them. And the wrath came upon that which held them in bondage, in slavery. They came forth. The Son himself, Israel my son, the firstborn, comes forth. And even in God speaking to them does not say, you see what I did to Egypt? You got to do it again. Or you have to do it too. No, he says, you see what I did? They're all dead. But the whole point was I brought you unto me. See, that's the whole thing. I brought you out of death unto myself. That's why Colossians would say, we are translated out of the kingdom or the rule of darkness by being translated out into the kingdom of the dear Son. There's, again, those two pictures of kingdom and rule and a power that keeps and holds and binds the soul. We'll spend the rest of the time just talking about that thing that binds the soul. I want you to look at it. Luke chapter 11, you can turn there and I'll just read it out of my notes here. Luke 11, 38 to 39, and Matthew 23. We'll look at both of them. Because to me this addresses the thing that had to happen. And it also brings about and shows you the change that Paul's addressing in Romans 7, because the deliverance he cries out for at the end of Romans 7. This is a man, and you have to see it in this light. This is a man who, if you read Romans 7, we get a very negative connotation out of this, right? And rightly so, because that's what he's trying to do. But on the flip side of that, you have to see it also in the context of Philippians 3. Because the man who's saying this is the same man that was saying, touching the righteousness of the law, blameless. And here he's saying, wretched man I am, when I try to do good. He's talking about the good that the law describes and demands. Evil is still present with me. Every time I try to do it, evil is there. That's the same man. That's not a man on a good day and a man on a bad day. That's the same man under the same law saying the same thing. Because although he could perfectly do it, he could never perfectly be it or fulfill it. Because the fulfillment of it was spiritual. That's why Paul says the law is spiritual. I'm carnal, sold under sin. Again, using the analogy of a slave, one sold under sin. And he talks about a law, not just the law of Moses, and that's the whole picture of the man here, the husband. Not just the law of Moses that's over him, but the law of death and sin that's in him. Those are two separate things. And that's why he uses the word good throughout that chapter. And it's such a cool study to look at, because when he's talking about the law and the law being good, he said the law is good. When I try to, the law is good and holy. He's talking about the law in reference to the law. He's talking about something that is aesthetically beautiful, meaning on the surface beautiful, meaning it can't go any deeper than surface. It is gorgeous. It has a beautiful intent. It has a wonderful end to it, but it can go no further in its goodness than surface. That's all it can do. Can't change a thing. Can't make anything holy or righteous or perfect, but it can demand it. And that makes it good, because that's what it's for. It's to give you a picture aesthetically of the good that is coming. That's what it's for. But when he begins to talk about himself, and he says, in me there is no good thing, that's a different word. That doesn't mean on the surface. That means intrinsically. That means something you're born of, heredity, the word is, something of a certain heredity. The good that is intrinsic in my very being, there's none of it. Meaning, the law says good is demanded, but in me there is no corresponding, fulfilling amen to that testimony. There is nothing that can actually fulfill the demand of it. It demands something good, but there's nothing in me that can give us corresponding, fulfilling, substantiating amen to it. There's that division. Do it perfectly, because that's what you have to see. The man at the height of his religion. This is Romans 7. Doesn't sound like it, but it is. This is a man at the height of religious zeal, beautifully carrying out the things that are commanded under the law. Perfect. Doing it. Succeeding as far as the eye can see, successful in it. Transcending even his compatriots in the law. And some would say even his teacher. And yet this is the thing that's coming out of you. The success in the law meant nothing. It brought about nothing. It brought about no result. It brought about no change. There was something else that had to happen. Outward zeal couldn't do it. Perfect obedience couldn't do it. Nothing could do it, and it can't in Christ either. It is God himself that has to act upon a soul that has no power to do it. And bring into the soul what it cannot produce, it cannot conjure, it cannot make up. There's a lot to try, but you can't make up reality. Only God can act upon a soul, and I say act upon a soul because that's what he has to do. Because while we're in religion, always talking about the actions of a soul and what it has to do, what we need to understand is the passive nature of the soul. The soul is passive in its nature. It cannot act to make anything happen. It has to be acted upon by someone else. Because the one who acts upon it is the one who governs it and owns it. The change was not to you. The change was not of men. That God was not after changing men. It was changing the ownership of the soul of men. That's what it is about. This is the work of the cross, his death to sin. Yes, to put away sin forever. I'm talking about us who are found in him. What's the side of the cross that we look to? What's the work of the cross that we have to identify with? Because it's definitely not the death of Adam, not him being dead in sin, and we say, well, that death has to work in you. Why? That death was death before I came to Christ. I don't have to identify with a man who's dead forever, not even related to by God. No, the death I have to know, experience, and have worked in my soul in understanding of the Spirit is being dead to that man. Because until that understanding comes, even though the reality of it comes, I'm going to look at the man of flesh to try to find the reality that is only found in the man of spirit. That is why the comprehending of the translation has to come. That's why the comprehending of the newness of life has to break in my soul. The new day dawning. If any man be in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things are. You hear those words? We just read over things. Old things are passed away. Behold, the new is come. And here it is all things are of God, who came into the world to reconcile the world. And it goes on in that chapter there. And it says that he came into the world, reconcile the world. He did not impute their sins to them. That's a whole different side of the story. This is talking about God bringing about an overall death to one thing so that he can show mercy to all. We're talking about it. So he can show mercy to all who are found here in death. Who are dead in sin. This cross did adjudicate all men and the soul that is bound to that man dead forever. Separated from God, clean slate. It's all dead. But guess what happened? And I'm getting way ahead. Guess what happens in that whole work? We'll have to repeat this on Sunday. It'll be good. There'll be more people here. That one who held the soul in bondage, the man to whom that soul was married, is now dead. Right? And in that loses all legal right to the thing it held. So he can now call to that soul that is now dead in sin, yes. But he can be the resurrection and life of it. He can be the door. So that soul, just like Israel in Egypt, they can come through this door and become dead to death by being found in life himself. That is why 1 Corinthians 15 says, if he's not risen, then we're still in our sin. We have no hope, and our preaching is empty. And that's why you cannot stop at a certain point of 1 Corinthians 15 and say, this is for now, and this is for whenever, in the future. No, you have to realize the whole thing about a trumpet sounding, the whole thing about putting on incorruption, and if you look at it, most of those put on is in the past tense. Not future, past tense. These things have been done. You have put on incorruption and put off corruption. If you're found in him. Well, how can you say that, brother? Look at all the mess. I can say it because the scripture says we are born of the incorruptible seed. Do you think that being born of the incorruptible seed will leave any corruption at all? No. Because you're not in limbo. No. We're not in limbo, and there is no purgatory. You're either in death or you're in life. And you can't be halfway in either. You're not halfway dead to Adam and halfway alive in Christ. You're just all dead in Adam or you're all alive in Christ. Now the journey is knowing it. The journey is comprehending it. But the journey is not getting it. That's just the truth. I haven't gone anywhere. So here's the change. Here's the thing. Of one man, all are sinners, all are dead. One man, all live. And righteousness. Now this is Jesus. This is something he does with the Pharisees that to me shows this beautifully and shows what has to happen. In Luke chapter 11, verse 38. When the Pharisees saw it, he marveled, or the Pharisee saw it, he marveled, the Pharisee, that he had not washed before dinner. And the Lord said to him, now see the things that we just point out and say, oh, look at that. Didn't wash his hands. I know this is a big deal to them, yeah. But a lot of things are big deals to us that aren't big deals. A lot of things. I've had to kill a lot of big deals. So they point this out, and the Lord sees this, and he says, now do you Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness. Wow, that's an indictment. That's the very thing that Paul was facing here in Romans 7. Outside looked good. There's a problem inside. Now Matthew 23 to me says it beautiful. Matthew 23 verse 25. Woe unto you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you may clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and the platter. See that? Here's the first thing. Here's primary. This has to happen first. The inside has to be dealt with. This is Matthew 5, when we understand what Jesus talks about according to the law. I came to fulfill the law, not to destroy it. He brings it from the outside constraints of the flesh to the inward parts of man. And shows that the law was never about constraining the outward thing. You heard it said you should not commit adultery. So men will say, well, I didn't do that. That means I'm righteous. No. Listen to what Jesus goes on to say. I said that if you even look upon a woman to lust, you've done it already in your heart. He brings it from the outside that men can say, okay, I can do that. That's what they said when he gave them the law, and they couldn't even do that. Oh, we'll do everything he says. We'll do it. Boom. Next thing you know, didn't do it. Didn't work out very well. But now, he doesn't just say, you're not, it's not even about can't do the outward. That was almost impossible. But you can't do this. There is no way. That's what he's going to say in Romans 8, which we'll get into in these classes. What the law could not do, due to the weakness of the flesh, God did. By sending his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh to condemn sin in the flesh. That put away this thing forever. That the righteousness of God might be fulfilled in us. See, this is a transition. This is the work of God, and we're going to talk about it, as we go here. That was the whole point. It wasn't about, and you hear what he says about this? He says, he prefaced all of that by saying, if your righteousness does not exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, and look what he said about them. You wash the outside of the cup. What has to happen is first the inside has to be dealt with. We're going to talk about what he says here in just a second. But there's an exceeding righteousness that exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees. And unless your righteousness exceeds it, you can't enter the kingdom. Then he begins to show them how exceeding this righteousness is. Well, someone could say, I've never done that. Yeah, but you are that. See, that's why the works of the flesh, fruit of the Spirit, you see in Galatians 5, that's not the deeds done. That's the nature of the seed of two men. That's why it says one who is the fruit of the Spirit, the fruitful one. And we're married to that one, and it says you have your fruit unto God. It says that in chapter 7 of Romans. If you're married to that one, you already have your fruit. Why? Because you're married to the fruit of the Spirit, the fruitful one, the fruitful branch, the rod of Aaron that budded and brought forth. You're married to him. So it's exceeding righteousness cannot enter the kingdom. Then he begins to talk to them. Shows them the true nature of it. And what he's saying there is not about men not doing something. It's about a man who is so perfect in his nature, in his kind, in his very being, that the very thought of it can't even enter in. Can't do that. What has happened? There has to be an imposition by the power of another to bring about something you can't. Because you can look at the law on the surface and say, I can do it. But you can't look at the inward. Look at this. The inward parts are ravening. Paul says evil is always there. And we're like, we can do that. No, because they saw beyond the surface and realized there's a real problem here. And the problem is not, I'm not doing something. The problem is there is a law that governs my members. Remember what Paul says in Romans 8? There is a law of sin and death that governs me, that makes it absolutely impossible. And that law that demanded another man couldn't make it possible. Because it couldn't change your inward state. So here's what Jesus says to them. First, clean that which is within the cup. And we would think he'd say, and then clean the outside. But that's what we do. We get them in church, we start cleaning them up. And we love that. Because there's my part. That's my part. We're going to get them clean for Jesus. You know, we want to get the fish in the boat, and we got a knife already ready. We'll clean that fish. Look what Jesus said. Cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that, this is King James, that the outside of them may be clean also. Wait a minute, that didn't say clean the one and the other too. It says, if you clean this, the other is also. Meaning the inward condition determines the whole thing. If the inside's clean, the rest of it is. That's saying if the seed is holy, the fruit's going to be holy. If the root is holy, the branches will be holy. Again, we have to understand this in the light of the cross and what God did by bringing about the end of one man and raising up another. You have to see that division as being absolute. No gray areas. The two still don't have, they don't coexist. One is dead. One lives. One of them's your life. In Adam, and I've said this, you could say it, Paul said it in Romans 7, you could say, in Adam, it was not I, but Adam. You could definitely say that. Paul says it in Romans 7. Guys, it wasn't me. It's the sin that's in me that makes it impossible for me to fulfill the law. It's not me. I'm doing my best. It's not me. And people would say, man, that's a cop-out. It is you. No, it's not me. It's the sin that's in me. I thought for years, that can't be right. That doesn't even make sense. Of course it's you. Try harder. Pray more. Do something. No, there's something in me that binds me, and we have to understand that's an enslavement you can't get away from. That's a binding that only has one remedy. It's death. The death. Christ died to put away once and for all sin. The inside condition of the inside determines the whole thing. And see, our minds start turning. I don't know. I get all the questions. So what are you saying? We can just all do whatever we want and we're still born again? Yeah. But I'm not saying we should do what we want. There's a reality that teaches us to live godly. And it's the inward work of the Spirit, teaching us how to live, how to order our lives. Yes, absolutely. But that ordering of your life doesn't make you holy. The life that's in you makes you holy. You see the difference? We get caught up on the external, and we think that makes you holy. Why? Because I can assess that. I want to tell you if you're holy or not by looking at you and saying, that's not holy, that is holy. Because that keeps me in job. As a Pharisee, it gives me something to do. And I think I'm doing the Lord's work. The reality is, righteousness is of such a nature, you can't see it with the natural eye. You can't know it with the natural eye. Sin and righteousness are the same. Because you never determined either. And I think that's good news. I'm sorry. I think that's the best news that could ever be preached. I do not determine anything with regard to my soul's condition. Not I. That's what that means. I'm just saying it in a different way. Not I, but Christ. Live in it. The life I live in this body on a daily basis, I live by that faith. It is not I, but Christ. I live daily there. Who, listen to these words, and this is what we're going to really get into. Who loved me and gave himself for me. It doesn't sound like a God angry at you. Not you. The wrath of God didn't come on you. The wrath of God came upon that which held you prisoner and slave, so that you may be delivered and set free from such an enslavement, so that you can be healed from a sickness that is not physical, but is permanent, unless he heals it. We'll talk about that